There's been a clip going viral on social media recently in which Matt Damon and Ben Affleck sit down with Joe Rogan for one of his long-form podcasts and explain that there's been a push recently from big studios, especially Netflix, to change the way in which films and TV shows are written, to emphasize something which is starting to become known as second screen viewing. Essentially what this means is that people these days are so distracted by their phones that they're only half paying attention to what's on their TV screen, what the film is or the TV show that they're watching. And so writers and directors are supposed to take note of that and change what they do accordingly. Let's take a look at what Matt Damon said about this.
You know, you're watching in a room, the lights are on, other going on, the kids are running around, the dogs are running around, whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's just a very different level of attention that you're willing to, or that you're able to give to it. And that has a big effect. And it also ends up having an effect, or is starting to have an effect, on how you make movies. Like, for instance, the standard way to make an action movie that we learned was, you know, you usually have like 3 set pieces, one in the first act, one in the second, one in the third. And, you know, they kind of ramp up, and the big one with all the explosions, and you spend most of your money on that one in the third act. That's your kind of finale. And now they're like, can we get a big one in the first 5 minutes to get somebody, you know, we want people to stay.
Yeah.
So just like people give advice to content creators online, making YouTube videos or Instagram Reels or whatever it may be, to have that hook in the first couple seconds to hook viewers in so they don't swipe away. Now that style of creating videos is being brought over to creating films. Again, remember, films are supposed to be an art form. Even TV shows are. Now, broadly speaking, TV shows are less likely to be artistic in the same way as films have the potential to be. So we can even just leave TV shows aside for now and understand that they've always kind of been geared towards ratings and viewer retention and that kind of stuff, just given how shows work. Films are still supposed to be an art form. That is the form towards which they're supposed to be aiming, even if many fall short and many don't even try to achieve that. There are still films out there that want to achieve that, and still filmmakers who want that to be their goal. But the concerning part here is that even if the filmmakers really want to make something artistic and not worry about having all these hooks and everything that's going to stop the viewer from clicking away, the big studios who want to make their money aren't going to be so concerned about that. Even on a platform like YouTube, having to have that hook in the first couple seconds does change the way people make videos, and it does change something about how YouTube used to be compared to now. I'm not the first to observe this. Many people have pointed out that the good old days of YouTube are long gone, and that people used to make YouTube videos in a different way that was more pure, more enjoyable, more artistic, more creative, in a way that the YouTube algorithm these days just punishes and doesn't really allow for, because you've got to keep up all these different gimmicks. You've got to have the hook, the B-roll, all that kind of stuff, moving quickly so people don't scroll away or click away. And while there is sort of something sad about the fact that creativity is being punished on YouTube in a lot of ways, that is kind of another conversation, and it's also something which I think is less of a big deal, although not entirely unimportant, than something like this, where films themselves are supposed to start adapting to this digital media landscape and the attention spans that this world has now as a result of, you know, doom scrolling and brain rot.
And, you know, it wouldn't be terrible if you reiterated the plot 3 or 4 times in the dialogue, because people are on their phones while they're watching, you know what I mean?
Oh, no.
And so then it's going to really start to infringe on
Creatively.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And I think there's something a bit depressing about this sentiment that, you know, well, people are just going to be on their phones while they're watching a film anyway. So we need to adapt the film to meet them where they are, instead of sort of acknowledging. I mean, I understand it's not really something the studios can do a ton about, given that it is kind of a fact, but it's a depressing fact, right? That people are more interested in their Black Mirror rectangle of doom, you know, than watching a film, watching something that had a lot of heart and soul put into it. Again, if it's a good film, I'm kind of assuming here that the film is something that's worth watching, right? What I think would be a better move, and Ben Affleck will kind of speak to this, is to disregard that, to understand, yeah, okay, maybe some of these more artistic films are going to perform slightly worse because we're not catering to the doom scrollers, but still there's something worth doing here. Film is something that's worth doing for its own sake in a lot of ways, without having to cater to your audience's baser instincts and things like that. But let's see what Ben Affleck has to say, because he speaks about this in the context of them creating their own film, which they recently released.
But then you look at Adolescence, it didn't do any of that.
It didn't do any of that.
great, you know what I mean? So I think it's dark too, and there's long shots in the back of their head. They get in the car, nobody says anything. It demonstrates that you don't need to do any of that to get people, you know what I mean? Like, look, hey, the town had the action scene in the beginning, the first 5 minutes, because you know what I mean? Like, it's a common trick that you would go like, let me grab them and get them invested in. It's like the movies that start with the hero hanging from the cliff, and now we're going to flash back to the beginning and tell you how they got there.
So 2 things. Ben Affleck kind of better states what I was trying to say, which is that if the film's worth watching, people are still going to watch it. And you don't actually need to engage in all these gimmicks and things like that. I think really where something like that needs to be employed is if the film itself is actually not already that worth watching to begin with. And so people are maybe going to get bored simply because it's not an interesting film. So let's try to keep grabbing their attention as much as possible to make the money. But if a film is really masterfully created, beautifully made, people are still going to watch it. Maybe not all the doom scrollers, maybe it's a different subset of audience, but people are still going to watch it. And we see this time again with, filmmakers who don't necessarily go the easy route, who don't do a ton of fan servicing, who still create something that's interesting and unique and original and do really well. It's harder to get big studios to greenlight productions like that, unfortunately, because it doesn't seem like an easy, guaranteed win at the box office. But there are still filmmakers doing that, and they are still being vindicated by the numbers. But the other interesting point that Ben Affleck makes here is something that's interesting to remember, that trope of having something happen at the beginning and then doing a flashback or something like that is something that's been going on for a while. I think what's just important to remember is what's the reasoning for doing that? Because that's not going to work with every single film. Certainly Christopher Nolan is someone who has kind of mastered the art of the prologue, the opening sequence to the film that brings you in and hooks you in the action. I mean, even with something like Oppenheimer, the film opened with a man staring at a puddle with raindrops in it, and then went to the hearing and things like that, and it kind of just started telling his life story. That film had less of a prologue to it than other films by Nolan have had in the past, and that one did very well. In fact, it was a 3-hour biopic that was very engaging and very worth watching. Like anything, there's going to be a balance to be struck, but if there's a directive being handed down that you have to do this for every film, or it's not going to be greenlit, right? We're going to come in and in the pre-production and determine how you open your film or how you pace your film throughout to make sure that people keep watching instead of picking up their phone, then it is going to impact the quality of certain films.
Complaining about it makes me feel like one of these guys was like, when I was a boy, like, you always want to freeze the culture at the time when you, I don't know, felt more like, we didn't used to have these phones. People can still go to the movies. It's not like, I think we have this idea that's like an existential threat. Everything that comes along is going to destroy everything. Instead of like, what history suggests is that there's like marginal encroachments, things shift. Yep, as television came along, there was less theater going, and that's still going to happen. And people are still going to go to the movies because of what you said. Like, it feels like a cool thing to do. I'm going to go see The Odyssey, I guarantee you, in a theater, no matter what. Fewer of them, and you could argue that's because I have more choice or whatever it is. It's hard to fight supply and demand.
That's another interesting point by Ben Affleck, that by adapting to kind of accepting and understanding that a lot of people now watch films at home on their televisions, it does give more room for people to experiment with different things because you don't have to push for people to come and see it in theaters. And so there's less, it seems to be what he's saying is there's less of a risk to releasing a film on streaming than releasing a film in theaters. And so it allows for more experimental films to be greenlit. That certainly is a hopeful sounding thing as well. All in all, I do think it's sort of a depressing sentiment to hear that there is a push like this being made from major studios who have sort of just given up and accepted that everyone's just going to be on their phones all the time and not really bothered about watching cool and creative things that are being made. But at the same time, I do think there are some interesting counterpoints to be made, like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck made here, and some hope for the future regardless of that. And it'll be interesting to see how stuff like that plays out as films continue to be adapted. But it certainly is something which already I've seen in films, and especially TV shows, even if they're not like sitcoms, like dramatic miniseries TV shows, there's just an over explanation of what's going on all the time, and that doesn't always really feel necessary. And it's something that pads the runtime. I mean, this was a problem that I had with The Penguin. There was just over exposition all the time, and it ruined some of the twists in the show that would have been so much better, because you want to make sure everyone's caught up to speed and knows what's going on all the time, instead of trusting that your audience has a bit of intelligence and is able to follow along with the story that you are telling. With that being said, thank you for watching. This was just a quick look at something that I find to be rather interesting, and certainly a push which we've already seen impacting and what will probably continue to impact the films and TV shows that we watch in our daily lives. If you enjoyed this, leave a like and be sure to subscribe for more movie commentary and analysis.